You're listening to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, episode number 41. Today, I speak with international speaker, author, entrepreneur, and founder of Through His Eyes, Felicia Phillips, on God's grace. Welcome to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their touching stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I'm your host, Christina Reisinger, and today we will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. Hey, Felicia, and welcome to Faith Breathed Hope. How are you today?
Hi, Christina. I am doing well, and I'm so excited to be joining you here.
And we are certainly glad to have you. Can you tell the audience something interesting about yourself that they might not know?
Something interesting about myself is that yesterday I tried cottage cheese. I was going to say for the first time. It wasn't the first time. I tried cottage cheese 4 years ago, and I hated it. But I'm a healthy lifestyle coach, and I encourage my clients to eat cottage cheese as a form of protein. And so I said, let me go at it one more time. And so I had it yesterday with some cherry tomatoes and salt and pepper and a little bit of garlic, and I enjoyed it. So now I eat cottage cheese.
That's awesome. I love cottage cheese, actually. I don't know anybody else who does, though. So today we're here to talk about God's grace. And the first thing I always have my guests do is tell a little bit about their story, and then we'll get into the conversation a little further.
Sure. So in thinking about grace, I think for years I've thought of grace as the vehicle for my salvation, right? I looked at it as God's grace, and by God's grace we're saved. And I never really, I guess, understood or never really internalized grace from the perspective of God strengthening us and God giving us power. And so it was through my experience over the past 4 years as a mother, as a minister, as a full-time employee, as a small business owner, and a caregiver, that's a whole big part of it, as a caregiver for both of my parents, that I really had to dig in and learn what grace really meant, or not what it really meant, but really dig into the fullness of what God's grace was. I remember when I took on caregiving and I was stressed out and I was in the middle of trying to write my first book and I had a new full-time job. And my coach at the time would always say, God is going to grace you for the task. God is going to grace you for the task. And I would roll my eyes like, she doesn't understand what I'm dealing with. I don't know what she's talking about. Yeah, God. Yeah. And it really took the experience that we're going to talk about during our time together for me to really dig into what God's grace really means and why and how amazing it is that God's grace is available to me, not just at the point of salvation, but throughout this journey, throughout this walk with God, as I walk the path that He's laid out for me and really look at what God has for me and what assignments God has for me, that I'm able to do it, not in my own strength, but by the grace of God.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And I think it's really easy to accept the piece that, by God's grace, we are saved. But I personally just went through this with my kids, trying to teach them about grace. And it can really be a difficult concept to wrap your head around. I mean, this idea that even though we don't deserve something, we've been given a gift. We know we've been given that gift of salvation, but beyond that, even here on earth, some things that it gave me an opportunity to do is to talk to my children about how, maybe you don't deserve to do something, but somebody gives you a gift because they're giving you grace. And I think one of the examples that came up was, I guess a kid did something wrong, and the parent not only didn't punish them, but they took them out for ice cream or something. And so, most parents are probably cringing right now. That's not a great way to parent, but it is that idea of grace, knowing that everybody makes mistakes. And, we have to have a little bit of a gifting, so to speak, to be able to get through situations and circumstances in life. And I know that you're here to talk about some of those circumstances in your own life. When you started noticing this, you said that your parents, you were caregivers, right, for them. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Yeah, but before I jump into that, I do want to just distinguish what you talked about in sharing and discussing grace is really where I was initially with grace, but not really digging into what God's grace actually was. And so I really love the scripture. I love the amplified version because it gives you a just opens your understanding. It gives you a different perspective to the word. And when you look at 2 Corinthians 12:9, when it talks about God's grace, it says that my grace, my unfailing love, let me find it. It says, my grace is sufficient for you. My loving kindness, my mercy are always more than enough, always available. So I could grasp the idea of, not necessarily getting what I deserved, but what I didn't really grasp at the time was that God's grace was what was empowering me and strengthening me. So I was accustomed to doing things in my own strength instead of relying on God. I was used to, winning in every area of life. I was good at school. I graduated #3 in my entire university, #1 in my class. I, always did well in school. I did well really everywhere that I went. My career, everything was always really successful, and I always knew how to figure things out. And I've been married for 20 years, love my husband dearly. Everything that I do, I was used to winning, and I was used to winning on my own terms. I was used to winning based on myself and my own strength and what I could contribute. And so when I began caregiving for my parents in January of 2017, I was faced with something that was so much bigger than me that I just didn't have it in me. I didn't have the strength. I didn't have the wisdom. I didn't have the understanding to do this on my own. And so for the first time, I had to really figure out what it meant to rely on the grace of God and how God's grace, as I said, my coach, Pastor Monica Haskell, would always say, God has graced you for the task. Well, when I began caregiving, my mother is 71. She'll be 72 in May. And she has a host of chronic conditions like diabetes and hypertension, but she also has vascular dementia as well as Alzheimer's. She's in the early stages of those two neurodegenerative diseases, but she has it. May not be detectable by people that aren't around her like I am, but she has been diagnosed. And then my father is 73, and my father has Parkinson's disease. And so with Parkinson's, you tend to eventually develop dementia. He hasn't been actually diagnosed with dementia, but I know he also has some form of dementia. And so here you have me, Felicia, that is just this busybody that's always involved in everything anyway. Like I'm already doing 10 things at once anyway. I was a full-time marketing and communications executive. I was growing my career and advancing and getting promoted time and time again. I'm a wife, amazing wife. I would think. We've been married for 20 years and he's still here. He still loves me. I love him. I'm a mother. I have 2 children, 2 daughters that live with me. And then I have 2 bonus sons that actually, well, we're all together now, but they're here in Georgia. And one of the reasons that we that we relocated to Georgia, I was a minister at the time. I'd been licensed in 2013 as a minister. And so, I'm still fairly new as far as being a minister at a church and doing all of these things. And now I have to take on the role of being a caregiver for my parents. And when I started, I actually thought we were just helping them. We actually encouraged them to leave their home and move into an apartment that was closer to our home so that we could be more accessible and we could help them, because we were at the time 45 minutes away. And my mother, was having hospitalizations and things like that and needed some extra care. And so we didn't have space in our home to bring them into our home at the time. So we said, you know what, would you be willing? I didn't even think they were going to go for it. Would you be willing to leave your house and come and move into this apartment? And they agreed. But at the time, we thought we were just helping. and did not realize until they actually moved that things like my father had stopped driving. Like, I didn't even know he had stopped driving. He still had a car. He was still going places. As far as I knew, he was still showing up at places, but my father had stopped driving. And there were just so many other things. And then I didn't know about all the other chronic conditions that my mother has. So I thought she just had diabetes. It was actually through caregiving, as I started going to her doctor's appointments, that these doctors were just coming up with all these other issues. So it was very traumatic for me going to the doctors, one, taking off of work to pick them up and take them to doctor's appointments. And then to hear, you're going into a PCP visit thinking that she just has diabetes, and finding out as you go to the other appointments and the specialist that she has diabetes, she has hypertension, she has sleep apnea, she has epilepsy, right? She has stage 3 kidney disease. So every doctor's appointment, it was like bad news. And so again, I'm used to fixing everything. And this was something that I couldn't necessarily fix. And so I really struggled in my faith to really dig deep and figure out, at the time I went to seminary school because I thought that God had called me to a pastorate. And here we are now 8 years post seminary school. And, even before now, I would sit back and think, God, you can't possibly want me to pastor a church with everything I have going on with my parents and my career and my marriage and, my family and all of those things. So it has really just been a whirlwind that, again, has caused me to dig deep. And I didn't embrace it at first. So I think the grace piece hit me because I preached it. I don't even know where. I guess God gave me the topic. I don't think that the church that I preached at really gave me a specific topic to talk on. I think that it was just where God led me. And in preparing that message, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, God began to minister to me and it really began to click.
I kind of can get a little bit about the caregiving piece. It's in much different circumstances, but we had to take care of our daughter in 2016. She was in the NICU for 5 months or 5.5 months, and then she came home for 5 months. And, when you're in that space where you're caregiving, you really have to look forward to see what your next steps are, how bad things are, how good they are, what you can do to mitigate a lot of different issues, what questions you need to ask, just seeking out a lot of things. And one of the things that I came to too is this idea that I had to trust God and I had to pray, and more so than I had before. And somebody had even given me a book about supernatural prayer, which I had never even heard of at the time. But just learning to really step into that prayer and, even put aside the struggle. It's so difficult at the time when you're in the middle of something to put aside that struggle and, even see that grace. I'm assuming. I don't know if you feel that way or not. I mean, at times it can be really difficult, right?
Absolutely. I just had a conversation with my oldest daughter who really struggles with this whole caregiving thing. She struggles with my parents, my mother in particular, is just a little difficult because she's not at the stage, again, where everyone knows that she has Alzheimer's and that she has dementia. And so there are things I have experienced because my grandmother had Alzheimer's. And so I've kind of lived this before. And so I probably, out of everyone in my household, I have a 17-year-old here, my 22-year-old, and my husband, really understand the disease and can identify what's the disease and kind of, what's their personality. And they sort of struggle with that. And my daughter in particular. So last night we were talking about finding about joy and vulnerability. I'm reading Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. And so there's a section where she talks about vulnerability and she talks about joy. And she also talked about gratitude. And so I was talking to my daughter and saying, we really have to take time to practice gratitude. And I said, that's what she's saying in the book. That's what Brene Brown is saying in the book, right? We have to practice gratitude. And it's not simply saying I am grateful, but it's actually a discipline or a practice. And my daughter was like, I can't think of anything like to be like grateful about, this scenario. But for me, when I pause, when I'm not frustrated because, for instance, just earlier today, I have a new teapot that I treated myself with. It was a Breville teapot, never had heard of it. I really love tea, so really super expensive teapot, had it in the kitchen, and my mother did something with it, so I thought it was broken. So I'm irked that I spent all of this money on a teapot that my mother has broken. But at the same time, I can pause in the midst of that frustration and say, you know what? We've been in a COVID pandemic shutdown for a year, but my parents are still here and they're still healthy and they're still strong. We've been in the pandemic for a year and no one in my household has been impacted. Well, we've been impacted, obviously, but no one has COVID, right? We've been COVID free for this year. We're in the middle of a pandemic where those who have loved ones in nursing home facilities and memory care facilities and all of those places haven't been able to see their loved ones or have access. But I get to come downstairs every day and say good morning to my mother and my father. And there are times when I don't want to, when they are really just, driving us crazy. But again, just looking for the areas where we can be grateful. I'm grateful that out of this pandemic, and that's the sort of the shift to the hope in the midst of a lot of the trials that I've experienced with caregiving, some things have been birthed. So I've been able to come out of my full-time job, not because I wanted to, but because there was a need to do that in order to get everything situated when we relocated from Philadelphia to Braselton, Georgia. And I've been able to grow my businesses. One business that I had pre-COVID, and then another business that I launched in July of 2020. So again, these are things that I may not have been pushed to do. I did have the one business already, but the second business, the Fat to Fit Academy, was something that was birthed out of my time sitting here and trying to figure out, okay, how do I replace my income, right? Because I left a full-time job and I'm now at home with my parents. And, I struggled even with, okay, Lord, do you want me to go to work? Do I find a job down here and leave them every day and all of that? Or do I, grow the business that I had? And so God has been with me every step of the way to work out every detail, to answer the questions, to fill in the blanks, and to get me to a place where I can look, and even on my worst days, I can look back and be thankful for the grace of God. And I can be really grateful for where I am now, because I'm so much further than I was before. Mm-hmm. And also, to that point, giving myself grace. Mm-hmm. Because what I realized in year one, we're now going on, we moved to Georgia in July of 2019. And so because we have been caregiving since 2016, I thought moving in together was just going to make everything easier, and did not really give myself a chance to understand that we still had to acclimate to all being in the same home. Mm-hmm. And so this first year, where I was probably expecting everything to just go really smoothly, and it's going to be amazing now because they're here and we don't have to drive to their house and all of that, it was an adjustment to be in a house with both of my parents for the first time in 20 something years. And so I have to also remember to give myself grace.
I'm sure. And, I think it's interesting to know that the gratitude piece actually can lead to an open heart, that can be filled with that grace. Because I was actually just talking about that today in one of my groups, about how, when we have these circumstances that come across us and give us these feelings that we don't like, we can choose to look at all of the good things and say, hey, this is bothering me, but X, Y, and Z are still good. And, you can really see that growth, and that is so important. And I feel like, the scripture is just filled with instruction, that can tell us what we should and shouldn't do, but it can put us in this place where we're not in the best emotional state, where we think we feel shamed or something like that. But it's really designed to be for our good, to give us that instruction so that we don't have to go through that consequence. And so that is a gift in and of itself. But, the space to where we're able to really look at life and say, hey, you know what, we have all this storm going on, but I can pick out these things in my life that are so wonderful. And I can see that growth, and I can see God in everything, in my life, is so important. And it gives you that space in your heart to say, hey, I can give grace to other people, because grace is a gift, right? And it is something that not only do we receive, but we give her to ourselves. Like you just said, you have to give yourself that grace, know that you don't have to have that perfection. Know that everything is not going to always be perfect, knowing that you have to surrender to God. You can't always take care of these things all by yourself, no matter how high achieving you are. But also that it's meant to give away, it's meant to offer up to other people. So not only do you give yourself grace in these situations, but you're also giving your parents grace, saying, hey, they may not be functioning the same as they used to, but at least they're still here. At least I have the opportunity to spend this time with them when so many other people haven't even seen their loved ones for a long time. I like that. Um, you had mentioned in some of the stuff that we were talking about anxiety and depression. Is that something that you have experienced?
Yeah. So again, I'm used to handling it on my own. I'm the fixer. And I do have very strong faith. So, when I can handle it, I know that God can handle it. And most times, I think that it's been, like I said, sort of short-term things. You can look at caregiving in a really positive way, or you can look at it in a really negative way. The negative piece of caregiving is that good or bad? If I continue along this path, this could last forever. Like this could last for a really long time. If caregiving is, and that's why I love this scripture, 2 Corinthians 12, where we get that picture of the thorn in the flesh. And honestly, when God began to minister to me, it was because caregiving for me felt like the thorn in the flesh, except I couldn't quite ask God to remove it from me, because removing it means they're dead. But in my perspective, other people might say, well, you have options. You can put them in a nursing home or an assisted living facility or all of those things. Those options, those are not options for me right now at this moment. And so for me, it is dealing with this until they pass away, which feels like a death sentence. I mean, it feels like, a sentence that just lasts forever. Or you can look at it, like you said, from the positive standpoint that, I have both of my parents and I love them and they are getting better in certain areas. My mother, for instance, because she moved in with her daughter, who's a healthy lifestyle coach, my mother has lost 64 pounds since we moved.
Yay!
And out of that, she is feeling better. She has more energy. She is no longer having to take insulin. She was stabbing herself in the stomach twice a day with insulin. She no longer has to take any medication for her diabetes. So from that perspective, if I were to go back and say, would I want to do this again? Things have gotten better in certain areas. There's certain things that, that may not get better. My father, unfortunately, seems to have declined, particularly during COVID. So he has some issues now that we weren't dealing with prior to COVID. And so it does seem like he's had a little bit of a decline, but it's really in perspective. I can say, and I'll say this, even if I don't feel it, I know my daughter does. When people say things like, well, at least they're still here, or at least they're still living. I haven't lost parents, so I don't know what it feels like to be in a space where they're not here. But I can say that it is a very difficult thing to hear and to process when you're dealing with what my family and I deal with on a daily basis and the sacrifices that we've all made in order to care for my parents. So there are days when it is not, at least they're here, because they're being here. Getting to your original question is why mommy is in therapy, why my wife is in therapy, right? And why I'm dealing with anxiety. So to answer that question, 3 months into caregiving, I was sitting in my office all day crying, and I called my husband and I said, I've been sitting in my office with my door shut, crying all day. I need you to get me some help. And he called the EAP at his job and he found a therapist for me. I didn't like her voice and thought I couldn't listen to that voice every week. And so I took to find a different therapist. But I found a therapist because I had started to have what I assume are anxiety attacks. And it was typically because I'm used to being the strong one. I'm used to being the one to be able to handle everything. And so what I found was that in internalizing everything that I was feeling and trying not to show it, trying to keep everything seamless for my daughter. My oldest daughter was away at college when this first started. So not necessarily her, but my younger daughter, trying to, let her get through high school and teenage years without all of that, I was keeping so much in. And so I was absolutely having anxiety attacks. And I don't think that I hit rock bottom as far as depression or, clinical depression, but I absolutely had periods where I was absolutely depressed. Fortunately, at the time, I had a very flexible job. And so I was able to kind of get through that because of the flexibility I had to work from home and things like that without it really negatively impacting my job. But then that was another reason why when we moved, I said, I don't know if I can go back into, a 9 to 5 where I have to be someplace within a certain period of time, because on any given day, I just don't know how I'm feeling. And I did feel really broken. In fact, as we're talking, I just bless God that I'm finally in a place now where I don't feel that I'm broken. But I felt like I was broken and I wanted God to fix me. Like, why can't I handle this? Why can't I do what I always do? And again, it was God just pulling on me and saying, toss out your agenda and lean on me. Toss out your agenda and trust me. You can't do this on your own. I didn't ask you to do this on your own. You can do it, but you have to stop trying to do it by yourself. And so I haven't had any anxiety. There was a lot going on when I first started caregiving. So it wasn't even just the caregiving. It was the new job. It was caregiving. My daughter in college was going through challenges in college and all of that. So it was all of that happening all at the same time. And it was just like, you got to be kidding me. And so I just couldn't manage it. But I now am at a place where I do talk more openly and I journal. So some things that are more difficult that I tried not to share, particularly with my husband, I'm a little bit more open now. And it's always that balancing act, because I don't want to share too much because I don't want to upset him because sometimes I share something and it's like I've dumped it on him and now I feel great because I got it out off of my chest and now he's feeling bad. So it's always that balancing act, but I am able to share more with him so that I'm not internalizing so much and I'm not then having these anxiety attacks. And I'm still I was in therapy and I stopped when we moved, but I think about a couple of months ago, I started back with the therapy. And so that has just been really helpful for me to just talk through what's going on, talk through caregiving, because as much as my friends love me, the day-to-day things that I deal with are just so out of their league. They're in different stages in their lives. And, again, caregiving is my 24/7. And so on any given day, I could have 1, 2, or 3 big blow-ups or big problems. And nobody wants to hear about that every day. Like even your best friends don't want to hear about that every day. And so therapy gives me an opportunity to not feel that I'm not being heard and I'm not able to express it, but to be able to go and to talk to someone and talk through some of the challenges. And then again, writing things out. I'm not good with journaling in general, but I found that when I would get really upset and felt that I didn't have anyone to talk to, just writing down how I felt was really a great way for me to work through those challenges. So I don't feel broken. And I really am enjoying the time with therapy. I'm an advocate for therapy. I love God and God loves me, but God also anointed men and women to work in the field of behavioral health. And so I'm a strong advocate for that, because that is an issue that is often stigmatized, particularly in the Black community and in the Black church. I don't know about other communities and other churches, but I'll say from my faith tradition and from my background that sometimes there's this idea that you just pray about it and leave it alone. And you don't need therapy because you just need God and Jesus will fix it. And guess what? Jesus will fix it. But we can't determine who and how he's going to do it. And so for so many people, it may be through therapy. For so many people, it may be through a medication. I don't take any medications, but I am not going to think you're any less of a Christian if you do. Anxiety and depression are real, and we have to begin to face that and deal with that in the house of God, in the kingdom of God, and not make people feel bad or feel lesser Christian or feel weak because they're at a point where they need those interventions.
Yeah, I agree totally. And see, here's the thing is that grief is so different for every one of us. And it doesn't, like, a lot of times people think of, oh, you're grieving, it's because you've already lost. But, grief can start prior to the actual loss. We had anticipatory grief. For me in particular, it was always waiting on that phone call when our daughter was in the NICU, just waiting on them to tell us, she's gone, always waiting on her nurses to give us that call. And, I think that is real important to have support, have a big support system. And then I'm a very big advocate of journaling, so I'm glad that you are sharing that as well. I want to go back to the thorn that you were talking about, and is it Second Corinthians? You said.
Yes, it is 2 Corinthians 12.
12.
And the thorn is actually a little further up in the, let me go up to the top. Of course, I can't get it now. Here it is. Read the full chapter. So the thorn in the flesh is actually, like, I just so understand why I'm just so excited about grace now that I get it. And it's so funny because I've been saved. I've been a Christian for most of my life. I grew up in church. And so you hear things over and over again, and then it becomes real to you at some point. Mm-hmm. And so the thorn in my flesh is verse 7. And it says, because of the surpassing greatness and extraordinary nature of the revelations which I received from God, for this reason, to keep me from thinking of myself as important, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to torment and harass me, to keep me from exalting myself. Mm-hmm. And then it goes on to say, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times to make it leave. So this thorn is not something that, that you want. Who wants a thorn in their flesh? You want this to go away, let God, God is a miraculous God. Heal my mother from Alzheimer's and diabetes, and let them go back to their life. Heal my father of this Parkinson's, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not how, that's not what God has decided to do in his infinite wisdom and in his plan. That's not the path that he took. And so you get to a place where you have to, just like Jesus, not my will, but your will be done. He didn't want to, he wanted to get out of the cross. But at the end of the day, he had to submit to God's will. And so it is the same with me. I had to come to a place where I submitted to God's will. But then even beyond that, God wouldn't let me just be a caregiver and give up or abandon everything else. And so it was that piece that was also the challenge for me. And that piece that God really dealt with me on, that I was a caregiver, but he still pushed me in that caregiving. 2017 was the first year I published my first book, Chasing God, Manifesting Your Dreams. The next year, that same year, I traveled to New Delhi, India, and spoke internationally for the very first time. So in the midst of everything that's going on, in the midst of I would tell my husband, this seems like the worst year of my life and the best year of my life, like every year, because something amazing would happen. Mm-hmm. But then it would be against the backdrop of so many things going on behind the scenes. My husband is one that I think he's a little bit more open now, though I still think he thinks I'm a little crazy. He just was not accustomed to the therapy thing. So it's like, if you go into therapy, you're crazy, or there's something wrong with you, not as, therapy as at times being really just a proactive approach to making sure that I'm good. And so you have all of those pieces working together, but God still allowed me to produce in the midst of it all. In fact, I have the title now. I've been toying with writing a book specifically on caregiving. And my challenge is just trying to figure out what I want to focus on and what I want to share. I try to share with people on my YouTube channel and my Facebook page I have for caregiving, Hanging with the Elderlies. I try to give an authentic glimpse of caregiving. So I don't dress it up. There are days when I'm like, I want to punch her in her face. Like, seriously, serious. My mother can sometimes in her own disease state be really nasty to my father with some of the things that he needs help with. And it's not necessarily her just being mean. It's her not understanding. My father's hand shakes. So it was hitting the table and it was making this, I don't know, just while we're eating dinner. And she's like, John, would you stop? Just move your hand. And it's like, that's so rude. Like, he's not doing it on purpose. So, there are days when I want to just pop her. But I try to give an authentic glimpse of caregiving so that people really have a sense of what it is, and then helping people to understand how they can move forward and how they can do it, and still be successful in their lives. But then I also kind of am challenged because I don't want to try to share, but also maintain my parents' dignity. So there's certain things like my dad is dealing with incontinence. I don't like to talk about that a lot because I don't want to embarrass my father, but it is a very real issue in my home. When, you have an accident and the, adult urine is just a little stronger than babies. Let's just say that. And so in like a matter of seconds, it can just really fill up a room, and it's just kind of, nasty. My kids are like, oh, and they're running upstairs and all of that. Those are some of the things that we're dealing with on a daily basis. So in thinking about a book, it's really just trying to figure out what aspect I want to share, how I want to present it, and if it's something that I want to do while they're here with me or something I want to do afterwards. I'm not really sure. He did give me a title 2 days ago. I was really surprised with that. That just dropped in my spirit 2 days ago. So I wrote it down and said, okay, we'll put a pin in this guy.
Yeah. And I think that's awesome that you're doing all these things. And like I was saying, Paul tells us about the thorn in the flesh. And I don't know if you are familiar. I'm sure you are because you're from near the Atlanta area. But Tony Evans, I listen to him quite a bit. And he was talking about the thorn in the flesh the other day when I was listening to one of his podcasts. And it really is a place of tenderness and a place of discontent, but it is also a place of pure growth. It is a place and an opportunity for God to do a lot of work in our lives. And I have seen that personally. That's why you and I are here today. That is why I created this podcast, because I wanted people to be able to share those stories where they can say, hey, you know what? This is going on in my life. This has this has happened to me or, around me, but God has given me that grace so that I can walk forward, because so many people are paralyzed in their situations. So many people are unable to walk forward because they don't see that hope, and the Lord is our hope. He is our stronghold, and he gives us that grace so that we can continue to persevere, walk forward, and really be of service to his kingdom, so we can share our stories with other people and they know that they're not alone, and they know that they can reach out and do the same and help other people and bring them to him as well. And he just really shows his goodness. Felicia, are there any kind of things that you might want to share, pieces of encouragement that you want to share with the audience? Maybe somebody has just started caregiving, or maybe somebody's been in caregiving for a very long time and they have that anticipatory grief, or maybe they're just really tired and they're weary because it takes a toll, and nobody ever wants to say, hey, I've been doing this for so long and it's just not something that I want to do, because you love your people, right? But it really is it's a lot of stress and a lot of weight to carry that. And like you said, you can't carry it on your own. You have to allow God to lift it, from you. But do you have any encouragement for people who are in that space of caregiving, whether it's in the beginning stages or, they've been doing this for quite a while?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say is to just be really prayerful about the decision. This is for people that are at the beginning, to really be careful, be prayerful about your decision, because there's a lot of guilt around making different decisions, whether it is if I have siblings and maybe my sibling takes my parent instead of me, do I feel guilty because I'm not helping more? Or maybe I live out of town and I'm not able to help as much. Then there's the guilt of, do I move my parents in or do I put them in a facility? Or there's so many different things. There's so many different challenges. You really want to be prayerful and let the Lord lead you with what is best for you and your situation. It's great to hear from other people and to get advice, but every situation is really unique. And so you have to really hear from God, and you really have to move by God's Spirit. The next thing that I want to say is, again, going back to the scripture that I love, when Paul talks about boasting in his weakness, we have to, and that was something that God had to deal with me on, right? I don't show weakness. I succeed. I win, and I was in a place of vulnerability and I was in a place of weakness, and I had to acknowledge the weakness and learning and understanding from the scripture what God's grace really meant, that God is perfecting his power in me, that he's perfecting his strength in me when I'm weak, that I am freeing myself up for him to do that. So that's why Paul was boasting in his weakness, because it's another opportunity for God to show up. It's another opportunity for God to prove who he is and to show us who he is and to remind us that no matter what you're going through, I'm here and I have your back, right? My word says I'll never leave you nor forsake you. So at the end of the day, hold on to God. Hold on to God, trust and believe. Don't be afraid to ask God for help. God is standing there and he's waiting to help us. But if you're like me, you can do it on your own. You just have to figure it out. You know, what's the next thing I have to do? Everything is figure outable. I'm reading that book now too, right? And so you can figure out everything. And with caregiving, you really need guidance. You need wisdom. You need patience. You need the fruit of the spirit. So be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself, and then also take care of yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. And so you have to be able to pour into yourself and allow God to pour into you spiritually so that you have the strength to do the things that you need to do and know when to ask for help and know when to receive the help and receive it. You know, don't push it away. Now, I will say there are probably a lot of caregivers that were like, oh, I would take the help if people would offer it. The challenge I will say is that people don't necessarily offer because they don't know what to do. But when help is available, take the help, be prayerful, invest in therapy, take advantage of support groups online, in person, you know, maybe not because of COVID, but you can do in person, you can do virtual, you can do, there are tons of Facebook groups and even Facebook groups that are designed based on your disease state. So I'm in a general caregiving group, but then I'm also in a caregiving group for people with Parkinson's. I'm also in one for people with diabetes or dementia. So all of those different things impact different areas. But to sum it all up, just this is the time that you have to dig deep in your relationship with God and trust that God did not bring you this far to leave you, that he's going to be with you every step of the way. And if you would just surrender, right? Present your body as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. If you give yourself away to God, God is going to pour into you and God is going to blow your mind. My mind is blown by the things he's done in my mother, you know, the praise report I shared about my mother losing the weight. My mind is blown in the businesses that I have. This time last year, I was not managing all of the clients that I'm now suddenly managing or making the revenue that I'm now making. God has just multiplied in the midst of a pandemic, in a very uncertain time. God has been with me to say, I know your sacrifices. I see what you've been doing. And I said I wouldn't leave you alone. I know what you gave up. I know what you left behind. And I see your tears and I'm here for you, daughter. And I love you. And so if God can do it for me, listen, he's no respecter of persons. He can do the same thing for you. So I am praying for every caregiver and I'm praying for those who are grieving, not just grieving after death, but the anticipatory grief. I get that. And then there's also another term that I found in my caregiving experience, ambiguous grief, which is the grief that you deal with when you are just dealing with a loss. Like my mom is not the mom that she used to be. Oftentimes when I deal with my parents, I'm dealing with them as a caregiver. So in very rare moments, I really get to sit back and take a deep breath and be a daughter, right? So my ambiguous grief is that I've lost, in some sense, my parents because I'm the parent now. I've lost that relationship. I don't typically go to my parents and ask for help or advice. Although I did stay at an extended stay and I didn't realize that they gave you pots and pans and silverware and stuff. And I'm sharing this because it's important. It's what I'm talking about. I called my mother and I said, we're in an extended stay and we want to, we can go grocery shopping because there's a refrigerator and there's a stove and everything. But I was like, I don't see any pots and pans. And she's like, go to the counter and ask them. They should have that for you. So that something so simple was so special to me because I don't get those opportunities where my mother's really solving problems for me or really giving me advice or telling me how to handle it. And it felt so amazing. That just happened in December. I was in Philadelphia, actually cleaning out their house and preparing to sell it. And it just felt so good to say to my husband, my mom said we can do X, Y, and Z because that doesn't happen. So so that's just a small piece of my story and what I'm living with every day and how God has just really kept me and sustained me through it all, through the grace of God.
Yes, definitely. And that shows that gratitude piece as well, knowing that you can still find good things, even in your situations. Like Paul says, I've had a lot of good things, a lot of bad things. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. He says, but I've learned to have peace with all of it. I've learned to be comforted in all of it. And
Mhm.
and again, I completely paraphrase that entire verse, but it's actually one of my favorite things, because that is what I'd like to strive to be, is like Paul in that situation, where no matter what situation that we face, because we know that we are going to face a lot of different things in life,
Right.
that we're able to do it with grace, that we're
Absolutely.
able to say, hey, I can be okay no matter what's going on, because I understand that my Heavenly Father is there in the thick of it with me, and He has something that's cooking that maybe we are not aware of, but He's going to show us growth, and all we have to do is surrender and obey Him and trust Him. So
Yes, absolutely.
Felicia, can you tell everybody where they can find you, please?
Absolutely. So you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at FRP Speaks. That is FRPSPEAKS. I also have two businesses through His Eyes LLC. My website is FeliciaRPhillips.com. I do marketing, communications, coaching, and speaking through that business. And then, of course, the Fat to Fit Academy, which was launched in July of 2020. And part of the reason that my mother is 64 pounds down and not on diabetes medication, you can visit www.fabtofitacademy.com for more information on that.
Awesome. Well, check out Felicia in all the places, and thank you so much for being on Faith Breathed Hope. And I look forward to seeing you guys again here soon. Continue to be blessed and bless others. And I want to thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope, where you gain inspiration and motivation to renew hope and discover purpose in any circumstance. Please like and share this podcast and give us a review on iTunes. Be blessed.